I'm joined now by Peter Bechtold. He's a former director of Near East and North Africa Studies at the Foreign Service Institute at the State Department. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, he ruled for more than three decades. He stayed in Yemen after his resignation in 2012, despite being wounded in a bomb attack on the palace in 2011. He once compared ruling Yemen to dancing on the heads of snakes. Was this end inevitable, do you think?
Well, the instability is inevitable, unfortunately. Yemen is a very, very complicated country. For one thing, it's mountainous, and there are 16,000 villages in Yemen with populations of less than 200 high up. And so no government runs roads or electricity into these mountains. And so there's a great deal of people who feel underserved, and sooner or later they fight against the central government. And this goes back really centuries. But the other thing that has to be mentioned as context, if I may, is that the conflict between Saudi Arabia and Yemen goes back at least to the 1930s, when Prince Faisal, who later became king, led a Saudi attack on a buffer state between between Saudi Arabia and Yemen. And they seized it, and most Yemenis believe that they lost territory that is rightfully theirs. And so there has been this tension with Saudi Arabia being much stronger militarily because of its financial background, and tribes in northernmost Yemen. And as I said, this goes back a long time.
Peter, some describe Yemen as a failed state. I mean, there's mass starvation, civil war. Some are describing it as the world's worst humanitarian crisis. But some are even going on to say that things are going to get worse because of this killing. Is that how you see it?
Well, it's possible. It's true that it is the world's worst humanitarian crisis, according to the United Nations. You may have seen the figures that over 2,200 have died of cholera since April of this year. Since the Saudi campaign started, more than 8,500 people were killed, 50,000 people were injured. So in that sense, it's a really terrible situation. The outside powers who have taken an interest are the United States, whose primary concern has been fighting Al-Qaeda and Islamic radical movements that also exist in Yemen. Inside, you have a conflict of sorts between the Sunni group that belongs to the Shafi'i sect and the Shia groups that belong to the Zaydi sect. But that split, in all the years that I've been in Yemen and have followed Yemen, because it's a fabulous country and the people are wonderful people, is not as severe as the Sunni-Shia divide in Iraq and Syria. And if I may, Mike, I'd like to take a point of disagreement with Mr. King, who just came on before me. I think there's an overemphasis on proxy war. Yes, Saudi Arabia is very interested. It sees itself as the center of Sunni Islam, and Iran is the center of Shia Islam. But this conflict would exist without Saudi Arabia and without Iran.
What will his legacy be?
What his legacy is is twofold. One, he is one of the longest serving leaders in the Republican times. It became a republic after the civil war from 62 to 69. And he presided over the country from 78, as you mentioned in the first setup piece, until 2012. Secondly, he established a political party, the General People's Congress, and they have regularly won elections. And they were able to unite with South Yemen, which is something that has been compared to East Germany, West Germany, and a little bit more distantly, South and North Korea, where you have one people speaking the same language, having the same long history, but having been divided in modern times by associations with the communist world in one case and with free market societies in the other. So he was able to bring those two together and preside over them relatively unchallenged. but the emphasis is on relatively.
Relatively, yes. Let me ask one final question. Arab Spring-inspired protests, of course, led to his demise from power. What's going to be history's verdict on the Arab Spring?
Well, you know, I never liked the term Arab Spring because it was taken from the Prague Spring. It was really a series of Arab uprisings against unjust governments. And it was not crushed by an outside power as the Soviets crushed the Czechoslovakian uprising. In the Arab world, there's a great deal of injustice. In the case of Yemen, it is complicated by the fact that it is the only state on the Arabian Peninsula that is a republic. It sees itself as more modern than the 6 monarchies. Its youth think that they're being attacked by Saudi Arabians because they have more liberties politically, they have more freedoms, yet they are impoverished. And that is without the war. And now with the shelling by Saudi Arabia, which, by the way, has been condemned by most of the world, but not so much by the Trump administration, we have an additional complicating factor. And whoever follows the former president, President Saleh, is likely to have short-lived rule similar to the people who came before him, because his predecessor in 77 didn't make it for 1 year. That predecessor from 76, just a little over a year. President Saleh, whatever his shortcomings have been, have provided stability in Yemen for a long time. And that made it possible for development to take place and for people to work together in a way that right now looks very, very bleak.
Yeah. Peter Bechtold, Peter, thanks so much for joining us from Portland. Certainly appreciate it.